Remember in my last video when I was talking about Valve supporting the scene and what we could and should do? Well, I think it's time to explain my experience and where I'm coming from. TF2 is not the only game I've played competitively, it's actually the third. The TF2 scene very often thinks of itself like Melee, but the issue is that it's not. Sure, both games are grassroots esports that have grown over the years, but where the TF2 scene has stagnated, the Smash scene has thrived. The issue here is that TF2 players don't know the whole story. Smash could have died out years ago when Nintendo tried to stop Melee from being played at EVO. Nintendo could have issued cease and desist orders for every tournament running Melee, and the scene would have slowly died out, especially considering that at the time people didn't really understand the law and likely would have just given in to Nintendo. This happened to the second game I played competitively. Not Melee, but Project M. I play P+ now and it's my favorite Smash game, and I'm not sure if anything else will come close, which is disappointing. But P+ has already been issued a C&D at Riptide, a Smash tournament in my home state of Ohio. I keep up with both scenes, Melee and PM. And as much as I will continue to play PM, I've come to accept that the scene was essentially killed years ago. And despite having a good revival, the game won't reach the same heights it used to due to Nintendo. The second game I played competitively was Halo. Halo competitively has been up and down over the years, mostly because Bungie didn't really support the MLG scene, but the Halo scene died with Halo Reach, up until it was revived with the Master Chief Collection in Halo 5. The death of the scene in Reach is due to a few issues, but if you look online you mostly hear about the issues that came up from the developers. Namely that the game was too slow, the armor abilities got in the way, Bloom, and there weren't many good maps. In Halo 3, the difference between the normal game and watching MLG was not noticeable for most players or spectators. The differences being an increase of speed and damage by 10% and a reduction of shield regeneration by 10%. Some weapons were removed and equipment was removed in its entirety, but considering the low impact of equipment at a casual level, it wasn't noticeable. In Halo Reach, more changes were made to the base game, an increase of speed and jump height by 10%, gravity by 50%, and a decrease in melee damage by 25%, as well as removing armor abilities on start and only keeping the evade and jetpack abilities depending on the map and season. The maps that were played were either tweaked versions of existing maps such as Zealot, or Forge-made maps such as Sanctuary. Was this variant good? Yeah, it was, and it was pretty fun. The issue was that Reach's competitive scene was so much different than what most players were playing, so getting new players into the scene was really difficult, leading to stagnation, then the downfall of the competitive scene. Now, where does TF2 come between all of this? Well, as you might have picked up, we share some of the same issues that both games had. And those issues may or may not be a bad thing for another game like Melee. For example, mods like UCF and stages can be great for the game, but that's because the game is in a fixed state. There are no updates, no bug fixes, no developer support. As much as it's memed that TF2 doesn't have any of those things, we do. Just in a smaller capacity compared to larger, newer games or Valve's other competitive games with Dota and Counter-Strike. So, compared to the previous two, where do we falter? To start off with Halo, the 6's scene is far too different compared to casual TF2, as well as the in-game competitive mode, which I'll talk about later. Right now, there are modified versions of existing maps, which may or may not be approved by the map's developer. We have a whitelist of items that can or cannot be used, configs for game modes to change how they operate, and restrictions on how many of a class can be played. Plus, we have a culture that hates on players who don't run the meta. So what does this look like? Well, it looks like 2 soldiers using the stock rocket launcher, gunboats, and the escape plan, a demo using stock or stock plus the Iron Bomber, 2 scouts using stock plus the Boston Basher, and a medic with the Crusader's crossbow, stock Uber and Ubersaw, Solemn Vow, or maybe Amputator. Is this fun? Yeah. Yeah, it is. But it's not what most TF2 players experience, and it really hasn't changed in years, with the last change being done by Valve back in 2016 by giving the medic the same speed as their heal target, also known as the Scout Speed buff. Then onto the side of P+, depending on what area of the world you live in, the scene has also experimented with modding the game, doing various things such as removing the aforementioned Scout Speed buff, as well as changing how certain weapons function. With a game that still has an active developer, this is an extremely slippery slope to go down that further removes the competitive scene from the vanilla game. Not only that, but if Valve ever decided to C&D those mods, the scene would either have to adapt again, or run the risk of getting killed by the actual developers. The meta in TF2 has been extremely defined, with little to no experimentation for far too long. and the culture of the scene doesn't help that. For example, if you decided to swap one class out of the standard lineup for your actual season, such as Pyro playing instead of a Scout, it's pretty likely, if not guaranteed, that other teams would say that you're throwing, BMing, trolling, etc., then refuse to scrim you. Sure, you'd play them in matches, but getting scrims is an extremely important part of maintaining and improving in TF2, both as an individual and as a team. Compare this to Melee, where people actively root for whoever is not playing the meta. Characters that used to be looked down upon, such as Pikachu and Yoshi, before Axe and Amsa came along, are now praised. And when those players win, or in the case of Wizzy with Captain Falcon and Axe with Pikachu, win a Super Major, it's a huge deal and a very positive event for the community. The Melee environment encourages people to experiment and not just follow everyone else and just be yet another Fox, Falco, Sheik, or Marth player. Are those characters at the top of the tier lists? Yes, but that doesn't mean that players cannot compete with lower tier characters. An aspect of the TF2 competitive scene that is overlooked is the dominance of certain teams. Since I'm North American, in my case that'd be Froyotech. Depending on who you are, you either see Froyotech as a problem or a good thing. I've heard different arguments about Froyotech over the years, asking for them to be broken up, forced to play on other teams, or forced to off-class, and more. Compare this to Melee. Before Leffen came along, pretty much every tournament of Melee was won by one of 5 people, named the 5 Gods. That era is gone now and the name is faded, but the idea remains. There are still top players in Melee contending at the same level or higher than was done before. Mango is the only remaining god, with Hungrybucks being off and on the past year and a half, but there are new players that have risen up, such as Zane, Plup, Wizzy, Axe, Nun, Amsa, and more. The mindset of removing the best players is both wrong and bad for the scene. The right mindset is to try to rise to their level or surpass them. Just last season, Witness Gaming beat Froyotech in a seasonal grand finals, their first loss in one in years. If the consensus was to break up Froyotech, that monumental event wouldn't have happened. The fact that it did adds a lot to the story of competitive TF2, especially in sixes. Needing to clarify what format I'm talking about when I mention competitive is also a bit of a weird asterisk that other competitive communities don't have to deal with. In Smash, there are multiple different types of formats. It's not just all 1v1s. You have singles with 1v1s, teams with 2v2s, and crew battles where you get 4 players to 1v1 back-to-back to try to deplete the other team's stocks. However, most of the focus in Melee is on the 1v1 aspect, as that's the main competitive format, and the other formats are more of a side thing. And this carries over to every Smash game, not just Melee. In TF2, that's not really the case. TF2 has 3 larger formats and a few smaller formats. The larger formats being sixes, which would be the singles of Melee, then Highlander, and Prolander. Then, for the smaller formats, you have 4v4, Ulti-Duo, and B-Ball, which would be more like volleyball added in Slippy. In Melee, most people make their name and primarily play singles while participating in others when given the chance. But there's a good chunk of the TF2 player base that only plays Highlander and would refuse to play sixes, likely because they're alienated socially because they can't play their character, while in Melee you can play and refine any character. The situation can be a bit of a catch-22, but the best way to resolve the issue is for players to be more accepting of either themselves or other teams pushing the meta, whether in a way that gets them to win or lose and lead to more refinement. Another aspect I'd like to mention that overlaps not just Melee and TF2, but TF2 and really any game that has a competitive scene. Most of the community of the game are not competitive players. They're casual ones. In Smash, most players just move on to the next new game. Melee has a large player base due to many reasons, but after Melee, the players from Brawl moved on to Smash 4 or Melee. Then the players from Smash 4 did the same, but to Ultimate. People do the same for Halo, and you can think of more mainstream games like Call of Duty, and it's still true. Also, some of the casual players in any game with a scene resent the competitive players, just like in TF2. It makes sense. The casual players get blitzed by the competitive ones and realize they're not that good, especially if there isn't an MMR or ELO system in casual matchmaking, making it far more common. Onto a topic I've wanted to talk about for a while, but I've needed to hold for a video like this, is balance. In many competitive games, developers of the game will balance weapons or characters to be stronger or weaker depending on their performance in a casual setting, as well as a competitive one. And while this gap is sometimes hard to bridge due to the skill gap, there's usually a happy medium. A good example would be Ganondorf, a character that's not particularly powerful in a competitive environment, but in a casual one can do really well due to the power of the character and other players at a low skill level not being able to exploit his weaknesses. In TF2, the same is done to a varying degree. Some competitive players have had input on the game, but not all their feedback was taken, and changes may or may not have happened because of them, making weapons better or worse. But nowadays, people seem to forget one major thing about balance in TF2. Valve has already made their decision on how they're going to balance the game. The game is not balanced around Highlander, or Prolander, or traditional 6s. Valve chose to make no restriction 6s as their competitive game mode, and will balance the game off of that in casual. I'm happy to help with pushing no restriction 6s in RGL and hopefully help push the entire format of 6s to be more progressive, but more people need to make that connection. Valve often only makes changes when players have had experience against an item, and if an item is banned, you can't have experience against it in a competitive environment. Valve tried to meet us halfway with their competitive mode, and while the launch was not handled well, the least we could have done, and could do now, is finally meet them halfway. Speaking of Valve support, something that the scene needs is money, and any scene can get that in one of three ways. 1, through community members putting up money to be integrated into leagues or prize pools, like is done in TF2 right now, or tournaments like Summit for Smash raising the largest melee prize pool of all time this year. 2, through developer support by devs putting money into prize pools or the scene in general, like the Valve International for Dota. And 3, through sponsors. TF2 has had and lost sponsors before, like Cooler Master, and Melee has done the same. Sponsors can be attached to players, like Red Bull to S2J, or to tournaments. It takes a lot of effort to get sponsored in any game. I mean, Wizzy had to win a super major to get sponsored. In the TF2 scene, I could see outside sponsors coming in, especially those that make PC components, peripherals, and more. The issue is getting the community to support those sponsors as well as the scene itself. Right now, RGL launched merch that looks pretty good and has been doing decently, but I'm not sure if we could get players in general to join in without an attitude shift of the community. Lastly, I want to talk about content. The large majority of popular TF2 content is from casual, both the game mode and players. In comparison, many of the top YouTubers for Smash are competitive players in some right, with the top players in each game also having a YouTube or social media presence in general. At the moment, Banny is the only prominent face in the competitive community. If you go into a pub and ask who knows who Habib is, they probably won't know despite his rising on Twitch, but might know Banny. Uncle Dane is also a competitive player and is basically the face of the TF2 community other than Lazy Purple and Funk, and they all are or were competitive players as well. They just don't mention it often, or the community doesn't make the connection. This doesn't mean that I want you to make videos solely about competitive, since that won't attract the casual viewers. I'm just asking that if you're a YouTuber that has a casual audience, and you also play competitively, just mention the competitive aspect of whatever you're talking about. Whether it be about how a weapon is really good in casual, but is really bad in competitive, how a balance change might have implications in general, or just talk about your experience and what you'd like to see. Sometimes even making that could be a good frame of reference of how you've grown, just like Uncle Dane did when talking about the in-game competitive mode. Alright, well that's pretty much everything for now. The next video will be on the half Zatoichi, but I'll also be trying to get out more competitive videos as well. So look forward to both. See you guys in like a month. Oh, there's a heavy medic demo combo going upstairs, and they both have unusuals, so you need to be careful.
Alright, we'll go here.
So pretty skilled.
Oh no.
They're at least boyfriend and girlfriend is what I'm saying.
Oh fuck!
Movies have
That's a
told me
crit.
the power of love is stronger than anything else.